Such a vision of church as paradise is largely lost to us now in Western Christianity. It was eclipsed in the 12th century when Western Christians abandoned the spirituality of paradise in this world and replaced it with the idea that paradise could only be entered after death and war could get you there. The decisive turning point came in 1095 when Pope Urban II called the First Crusade. Up until Urban's time, Christians regarded violence as a sin. War could be waged in self-defense or to right an injustice, but even if the cause was just, Christians understood that war harmed everyone who participated in it. It harmed the souls of soldiers. And so they taught that war, those who participated in war, experienced sin and had to do penance to heal their souls. But with the call of the First Crusade, this understanding of the sin of violence changed. Urban declared that war was not only just, it could be a form of serving God, an act of love for one's blood kin. Through killing Jews and Muslims, crusaders, he said, would receive forgiveness for all their sins. And they would be assured a place in paradise when they died. This was Christian holy war. And it was at this time that images of paradise in churches began to disappear and were replaced instead with images of crucifixion. This was a striking change. For most of Christianity's first millennium, Jesus had never been depicted dead, nor had his body been shown suffering in torment on the cross. These images only began to appear at the time and in conjunction with the rise of Christian holy war. And with this shift, Jesus' death began to be the central theme of Christian theology. At the time of this First Crusade, Anselm of Canterbury, who was Pope Urban's friend, formulated an explicit doctrine of atonement, declaring that God became human in Jesus for the sole purpose of dying on the cross in order to pay God back for humanity's sins. Anselm described Jesus' death as a gift that pleased God, his torment as a sweet offering. And based on Anselm's theology, preachers called crusaders to become soldiers who imitated Christ by offering themselves like he did to be sacrificed for the cause. This theology functioned then and now as war propaganda. To kill or be killed for God became the fastest route to paradise. Enemies of God were increasingly categorized on the basis of racial, cultural, or religious difference. And humanity was divided into the saved and the damned. Apocalyptic imagination intensified, leading to the notion that the redemption of this world could only be accomplished by God destroying this whole world and replacing it with a new creation. Violence and destruction were how God was imagined to save. We live now within the dominant culture of the West, in the aftermath of the closing of paradise and the belief that violence can save us. We live with the legacy of militarism, racism, and colonialism, and the exploitation of the earth that puts paradise at risk. And yet, with all of this, there is some whiff of paradise that still reaches us. Walking across the open prairie in early spring, the light of the wide expanse of sky kissing the grasses with fire, we glimpse paradise. Singing in church, the power of the music's energy, and the presence of one another's voices woven together into harmony. We feel and hear paradise. Cooking supper with friends, ginger and onions simmering in sesame oil, wafting into our nostrils, we catch the fragrance of paradise. Dancing with a newborn child in our arms, twirling, holding the joy of new life, we know we are in paradise. Rediscovering paradise and recommitting ourselves to the ethics of how to live rightly as citizens of paradise is just what we need now. Western culture needs to stand again at the open doors of paradise and find its way to re-enter this world as sacred space, as holy ground. It's time for this culture to take off its shoes. The Universalist heritage can help show the way. One Universalist leader in our history who stood at the open doors of paradise was the 17th century minister Jane Lead. In the church that this woman preacher founded, Jane Lead preached that people's senses could be ecstatically opened to tasting, seeing, and hearing the beauty that is within us, among us, and all around us. She offered a spiritual vision of paradise not as an otherworldly post-mortem realm, but as a place to be entered in this life. Come, enter the garden, Jane Lead wrote. You may think the gate has been closed and locked, that a cherubim with a fiery sword guards the entrance, but there is a way in. Wisdom holds the key. Lead saw the church as the renewed garden of paradise and called her church members to think of themselves as plantings of God, watered by the Spirit, bearing good fruit for the nourishment of the world. She said we could experience the presence of the divine in the burning bush of our humanity. She called humanity's beautiful diversity, her phrase, beautiful diversity, a testimony to God's generative, creative presence. Jesus appeared to her in a vision and said, heretofore, that's how Jesus spoke in the 17th century. Heretofore, I was particularly manifested to the world in singularity. But now henceforward expect me to appear in plurality. The world needs this universalist affirmation of pluralism because the Garden of Paradise is not monocultural.